suffering from an intense fever. I could barely move, thirsty and weak. I mustered the strength to ask my eldest son for a glass of water. To my surprise and dismay, he returned not with water but with a cup full of beer. Before I could react, he carelessly splashed the drink over me as I lay helpless in bed. Laughter erupted from the doorway, where his wife stood clapping her hands, her laughter blending with his. Through the haze of my fever, their mockery left a deep impression on me. "Make sure the house is spotless by the time we get back," they ordered before leaving. I was stunned by their callousness. Over the years, I had tolerated Luke and his wife's selfishness, but this moment crossed a line. "Yes, I'll clean it," I rasped, my voice straining against the ache in my throat. I made sure they heard me loud and clear. "My name is Mabel, a 73-year-old homemaker. My husband Dylan, who is 75, spends his retirement teaching children calligraphy at a community center, a dream I've supported wholeheartedly. Together, we raised 2 sons. Our younger son, married with 2 kids, lives abroad. Our elder son, aged 44, remains unmarried and lives with us. Luke works part-time at a convenience store but contributes nothing to the household. Despite repeated warnings from us, he's refused to change. One day, without prior notice, he informed us he had married and moved his wife into our home. From that moment, my responsibilities grew. I now cooked not only for my son but also for his ungrateful wife, who constantly made unreasonable demands. Even when Dylan intervened, their behavior remained unchanged, with Luke defending his wife's actions. Hoping for improvement, I swallowed my frustration and carried on, but their selfishness only deepened, with my daughter-in-law insisting I perform tasks like taking her clothes to the cleaners. Every year, Dylan and I visit our younger son's family in Canada during the federal holiday. We've grown close to our grandchildren, who eagerly await our arrival. This time, we had bought gifts for them, including handmade cookies from a shop I visited after running errands. Caught in a sudden downpour on my way home, I rushed back to avoid catching a chill, looking forward to a hot bath. However, as I prepared for my bath, my daughter-in-law barged in, claiming she needed the bathroom urgently. She demanded dinner be ready earlier than usual, before slamming the door shut. As I sneezed while preparing dinner, I worried about falling ill before our trip. My fears came true the next morning when I awoke feverish and weak, my temperature reaching 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Realizing I couldn't risk passing my cold to our grandchildren, I asked Dylan to travel without me. Despite his concern, I convinced him I'd recover with rest and medicine. Before leaving, Dylan instructed Luke and his wife to handle household chores during his absence. As he left, I overheard them complaining, dismissing my illness as insignificant. "She's just being dramatic. At least now we can relax since Dad's gone," they said, their tone indifferent. Their attitude infuriated me. Living rent-free in our home, they had the audacity to act as though they were doing us a favor. When I reminded them that everything they enjoyed was thanks to Dylan's hard work, they responded with self-righteous indignation, insisting we owed them for looking after us. Ignoring their remarks, I tried to rest, but my daughter-in-law barged in again, demanding I prepare dinner despite my condition. Unable to refuse, I made a simple meal, though it left me utterly exhausted. Luke, oblivious to my effort, returned home only to complain that the bath wasn't ready. After preparing dinner and the bath, I overheard them eagerly discussing plans for a 3-week vacation to Europe, a revelation they hadn't bothered to share with me earlier. Their excitement contrasted sharply with my struggle, leaving me heartbroken and angry at their selfishness. Feeling relieved at the prospect of their impending departure, I prepared to endure one last day with my son Luke and his wife. On the morning of their trip, my fever had worsened to a debilitating 103 degrees Fahrenheit. I could barely move, let alone attend to any household chores. My head throbbed, and my parched throat begged for water. Weakly, I reached out to Luke for help. "Make us breakfast," he demanded coldly, completely ignoring my condition. His words stung more than the fever. Summoning all my strength, I whispered, "Order food." "I can't." Luke's face contorted in annoyance, but he left the room without another word. Before he exited, I mustered the courage to ask for water, desperate for just a sip to ease my burning throat. When he returned, I couldn't believe what he brought, a glass filled to the brim with beer. Without hesitation, he splashed it over me as I lay helpless in bed. Peals of laughter erupted from the doorway, where my daughter-in-law stood clapping and grinning like a child at a cruel prank. Luke joined in her amusement, holding the empty glass triumphantly. "Make sure the house is spotless when we get back," she mocked, her voice dripping with condescension. as they left for their luxurious vacation. I lay there in stunned silence, my body drenched in beer and my spirit crushed, too weak to move. I eventually succumbed to exhaustion and drifted into a restless sleep. When I awoke hours later, something felt different. My face and hair had been cleaned, and fresh bedding replaced the beer-soaked covers. Bewildered, I sat up slowly as the bedroom door opened. My husband, Dylan, entered carrying a warm basin of water. "Are you feeling any better?" he asked softly, his face lined with worry. I blinked in surprise. "Dylan, you're supposed to be in Canada." He sighed and sat beside me. "When I called to check on you, our younger son told me you sounded much worse. I couldn't leave you here with them, so I came back as soon as I could." As he spoke, he explained what he had found upon returning, me lying feverish and soaked in beer, the house in chaos, and no sign of Luke or his wife. Overwhelmed by guilt for leaving me with them, Dylan had immediately cleaned me up and stayed by my side until I regained some strength. Tears welled in my eyes as I recounted what had happened. Dylan listened silently, his expression darkening with every word. When I finished, he stood and declared, "This ends now." That evening, Dylan called Luke and informed him of our decision. The house was being sold, and we were moving into a new one, alone. Luke's outrage erupted over the phone. "You can't sell our house. Where are we supposed to go? What about our stuff?" he demanded. Dylan's voice was steady but firm. "That house was ours, not yours. It's sold, and we've moved on. As for your things, they're in storage. You can collect them whenever you like." "But we're your family," Luke protested. Dylan's tone turned icy. "A family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated your mother. You've forfeited that right. Don't contact us again." True to his word, Dylan and I settled into our new home, a cozy, one-story house built with retirement in mind. Peace and quiet replaced the tension that had plagued our days with Luke and his wife. But the tranquility didn't last long. A month after moving in, Luke and his wife appeared uninvited on our doorstep. They must have hired someone to track us down, because we hadn't shared our new address with anyone outside the family. "You can't just leave us like that," Luke barked, dragging suitcases behind him. "As your eldest son, I have the right to live here. This house is big enough for all of us." Before we could respond, voices called out from behind our home. Several neighbors, alerted by the commotion, approached with curious expressions. One of them, a sturdy man named Ben, stepped forward. "Is everything okay here?" Ben asked, eyeing Luke and his wife warily. Dylan smiled calmly and replied, "Perfect timing, Ben. Could you help us remind these two they're trespassing?" The crowd murmured in agreement, their presence alone enough to unnerve Luke and his wife. Their bravado crumbled under the weight of so many watchful eyes, and they left in a huff, dragging their luggage behind them. From that day forward, Dylan and I finally enjoyed the peace we deserved, and for the first time in years, our home truly felt like our own. "We're living here too," Luke declared confidently as he and his wife stepped forward, dragging their luggage. Before they could set foot inside, the front door swung open. Standing there was Leon, our second son, looking genuinely surprised. "Luke? What are you doing here? Are you here to cause more trouble?" "You're old enough to take care of yourself by now," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Behind Leon stood his wife and their two children, Lila and Jasper. They had come over to visit us, excited to spend time in our newly built home. After relaxing for a bit, they had just returned from a trip to the nearby store. "Who are they? Are they mean people?" Lila asked innocently, peeking curiously at Luke and his wife. Leon glanced at Luke, an idea forming in his mind. "Why don't you stay here for a few days, while Jasper's family is visiting?" "But I'll make it clear, you won't be staying forever," Leon said, ushering everyone into the living room. Luke and his wife plopped themselves down on the sofa as if they owned the place. "I'm exhausted. Mother-in-law, can you make me some coffee?" "Black, please," Luke said nonchalantly. Leon's wife, visibly taken aback, was about to respond when the children chimed in. "Why can't you make it yourself?" "Even we can pour our own juice," Jasper said with a puzzled expression. The grandchildren, who were raised to be self-reliant, were genuinely baffled by Luke and his wife's entitled behavior. The questions didn't stop. "Why can't you cook or clean up after yourself?" "Mom and Dad always do," Lila added, her wide eyes fixed on Luke's wife. The relentless questioning soon wore them down. By the end of the week, both Luke and his wife looked utterly defeated. They couldn't keep up with the children's innocent but sharp observations. Luke's wife, particularly annoyed, snapped when the children kept calling her auntie. "Stop calling me that," she exclaimed. "Why not?" Lila asked, her head tilted in confusion. "You're way too old to be called sister." The room fell silent before Leon and I burst out laughing. Even Luke couldn't suppress a chuckle. Defeated, they left shortly after Jasper's family returned home. A few months later, Luke sent a text message, "Can you lend us some money?" Until then, they had freeloaded off us, eating our food and living rent-free. After we evicted them, they had to face the reality of supporting themselves. But Luke's part-time job couldn't sustain their spending habits, and his wife refused to work. It was bold of them to ask for money after everything that had happened. "We will not lend you money or offer any help. Take responsibility for your own lives," we replied before blocking his number. Days later, we got an alarming call from our home security company. Luke and his wife had tried to break into our house through a window. Security quickly intervened, and the police reprimanded them before letting them go. That was the last we heard from them. Even Leon wasn't spared. Luke reached out to him for money, but Leon was firm. "You made your bed, now lie in it. Don't drag me into your mess," he said before blocking Luke as well. Eventually, we learned that Luke had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now on the run, unable to repay his debts. As for us, we've moved forward. My husband, Dylan, now teaches calligraphy classes from our peaceful home. The grandchildren love visiting, attending the classes, and making cherished memories with their friends. We are grateful for the life we've rebuilt, free from entitlement and toxicity, cherishing the peace and joy we have now.